41 years ago, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to overthrow Iran's corrupt monarchy. The revolt changed the face of the region and inspired Muslims across the globe. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Shah finally gave up his fight to keep control of Iran and fled with his wife to Egypt. He had reigned since 1941. There had been numerous assassination attempts, and he had fled the country briefly once before, in 1953. But now it was over for good. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran from exile in Paris, and on February 11, the last troops loyal to the Shah gave up too. Imam Khomeini established an Islamic Republic with overwhelming popular support in a referendum at the end of March. At the prime age of 41, Iran is fully capable of charting an assertive leadership path to recapture the spirit and reaffirm the original goals of the Islamic Revolution of 1979, among which is the propagation of Islam to bring about social change for the welfare of all humanity. It is no minor accomplishment for the Islamic Republic of Iran to have maintained an independent geopolitical course for a period of 41 years, in spite of the overwhelming diplomatic, economic, and military pressure employed by the United States to force Tehran to cave into the dictates of Washington. By basing economic and social change on the solid foundation of Islam, Iran has achieved greater progress in many areas, such as reducing poverty, improving healthcare, eliminating illiteracy, increasing access to education, and expanding opportunities for women. As a result, despite the unending U.S. hostility against Iran through ruthless imposed wars, covert and overt aggressions, punitive economic sanctions, and continuing diplomatic isolation, the Islamic Republic has managed to amass an impressive list of accomplishments. Welcome to the Revolution's 41 at the Mideast Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. 4 decades of constant efforts by the U.S. and its allies to overthrow the Islamic system of Iran following Imam Khomeini's revolution have failed, as Iran managed to firmly resist the foreign aggression at a time when no one thought the country would survive its enemy's military power. To discuss this issue with us from Tehran is Dr. Mohammad Marandi, professor at Tehran University. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. Now,
Thank you for having me.
It is no minor accomplishment for the Islamic Republic of Iran to have maintained independent geopolitical course for a period of 41 years up until today, in spite of the overwhelming pressure from diplomatic pressure to economic pressure and even military pressure employed definitely and specifically by the United States of America to force Tehran to cave into the diktats of Washington. What was the main driving force for this accomplishment?
I think there are a number of important factors that we can take into account. One is, of course, that Iran became independent as a result of the revolution. Under the Shah, Iran was something like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, or you could name a host of other countries, completely reliant on the United States, simply exporting oil and importing weapons that were more or less useless for the country. The economy was completely dependent on oil, and so the country was in poverty. The majority of women did not have education, they did not read or write, and contrary to claims made in the West, the country was quite backward. So Iran's independence was an extraordinarily important factor, and as a result of that independence, Iran's own interests became priority rather than American interests. So Iran no longer aided the United States in Vietnam or in its antagonism towards the Soviet Union. Iran pursued its own policies that were based upon its own beliefs and based upon the interests of the country rather than some foreign entity. The second was freedom, and while many in the West probably don't accept this because powerful Western media, the think tanks, and the narrative in the West that there's no freedom in Iran, Iran today is a much more open society than under the Shah. The Shah was the absolute king, and people lived in fear. And the Americans helped create the secret police, SAVAK, and as a result, the country was silenced.
Well, Dr. Morondi, if external threats to the newly established back then Islamic Republic weren't enough, others arose internally. Foreign elements were actively involved inside of Iran in attempts to weaken and undermine the young republic, and it was from the very beginning, and it's still up there until today. How come those foreign elements hiding inside Iranian communities were not even able, after 41 years of the revolution, they were still not able to maybe rise and take over if they are that much of a sum in front of the revolutionaries?
Well, the third factor that I was about to mention actually, I think, is linked to your question, and that is that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Constitution is founded upon indigenous principles and values. And it is not based upon some foreign model, whether it was the liberal capitalist model of Western Europe and America or the Soviet model. It was based upon values that are predominant in this society, cultural, religious, social beliefs that struck a chord among Iranians. And those foreign elements that have been backed by Western powers, whether they were militants, whether they were terrorists, or whether they were simply activists funded or supported from abroad, their problem is that they are always linked with powers. Therefore, they could make real foothold among the majority of Iranians. So the BBC sets up a Persian service, the VOA, Deutsche Welle Persian service, or the Saudis, they created a TV channel in Persian, among tens of other Persian channel TV, and thousands of online soldiers, such as the Mujahideen Khalq terrorist organization that funded by the United States and based in a camp in Albania. All of this online and media warfare that's being targeting Iran, the reason why it fails is because people in Iran do not want foreign powers to rule over the country again, and these agents of empire are not seen to reflect Iranian interests, Iranian values, whether religious or any national or cultural values in any way or form. So while they have a target audience, a minority of people who are Western-oriented, the bulk of Iranian society simply does not accept foreign powers, and especially Western powers, to dominate the country again. So they have supported terrorists. They have tried to undermine the country through media warfare. They've imposed sanctions, very brutal sanctions against the country, but they've all failed. And the reason why they failed is because they simply cannot accept the fact the Iranians will not accept Western rule over this country.
Well, during the Iran-Iraq war, right after the announcement or the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and in spite near universal support given by the U.S. to Iraq and by its Western and regional allies to Saddam Hussein, the people of Iran rose to defend their country. They gave their lives to defend the country, and we had martyrdom of 500,000 Iranians, which actually was a strike, a shock, an incomprehensible shock to the West. They still cannot understand the ideology of the revolution. They cannot understand why the people of Iran would give up their lives to such a young republic at that point in time. Why is it so hard for the West to comprehend this? Why is the ideology of Imam Ruhollah Khomeini and later on Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei so difficult for them to understand?
Well, the numbers are inflated in the West. The Iranian casualties in the war were roughly 230, 240,000, including the militants, Western-backed militants that were active in Kurdistan at that time. When you combine all the casualties of the war, it was roughly half the number that you just mentioned, and a bit less than half. Mm-hmm. But it was a very one-sided war. The United States, the Soviet Union, Europeans were backing Saddam Hussein to the hilt. They gave him chemical weapons, the Europeans. The Americans gave Saddam Hussein the means to use those chemical weapons, intelligence, satellite intelligence. Europeans and Americans did their best to help Saddam Hussein carry out the most brutal atrocities, both against Iranians and against his own people. And this is one reason, actually, why the Iranians have become so steadfast, because we see that the Western Empire, despite the fact of being to be the civilized world, the free world, and supporting the rule of law and human rights, they have been the most brutal violators and most hypocritical violators of human rights over the last few decades in this part of the world. Their support for apartheid in Palestine, support for dictators like Mohammed bin Salman today and his predecessors, their support for Saddam Hussein, their conflicts and their interests came into conflict. In fact, Western countries, Western media never criticized Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons. As I said, they helped him producing them. The only time when this became an issue was after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And then the Western media suddenly made this a big issue, which also shows that there's no real freedom of expression in the Western media, because they abide by the interests of Western governments. So otherwise, this outrage with regard to what Saddam Hussein did would have been mentioned by the media or stated by the Western media when it happened, rather than years later when their interests.
This is where I want to end off, since we have just a minute left, Dr. Marandi, because the mainstream media portrays the revolution in Iran as a one-man show, from a leadership to Ruhollah Khomeini to another leadership by Sayyid Ali Khamenei. But this is absolutely not true. How can you explain to the Western audience how the leadership brought about a successful revolution, actually leading to the unshakable Iran that we know today?
Well, I think the very fact that we saw such a huge funeral for General Soleimani and his companions in different cities, including Tehran, it shows that this Western narrative about Iran is unfounded and untrue. Western countries like to say Iran, the Islamic Republic, is collapsing, it's unpopular, it's corrupt, it's falling apart, it's imploding. On the one hand, on the other hand, they say it's a rising threat. And all these claims are inconsistent. It's, the fact that such huge numbers came out, I think, prove that these narratives should be questioned by ordinary people in the West. But the Iranian constitution is dynamic. The leader is chosen by a body in the constitution, and the transition from the previous leader to the current leader was based upon the constitution. Mm-hmm. Unlike the Shah, where it was a family dictatorship, we have no children who continue the rule of the previous leader. Mm-hmm. And we have very important elections. The presidential election, the parliamentary elections, the local elections are highly contested. If they were not meaningful, these elections, the turnout wouldn't be so important, and Western commentators wouldn't be talking about them so much.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Marandi, professor at Tehran University, for being with us to talk about the 41st anniversary of the Islamic Republic. Thank you for your time, and please stay tuned for our next segment.